Prime Minister, thank you so much for taking time with us.
Thanks for having me, Donna.
This time last year, you weren't in politics. Fast forward to today, and you're at the very heart of it. What have you learned in the last 8 months, and what has surprised you the most about being Prime Minister?
What have I learned? Well, I'll tell you what has surprised me the most, even though having been around politics for a number of decades, in other words, when I was a civil servant, when I worked at the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, etc., I dealt with prime ministers in various ways. So I had a sense that the job is 24/7, 365 days a year. It's one thing to have that sense, it's another thing to live it. So in that respect, it is a surprise. There's just a host of issues that I'm sure we'll talk about, a subset of them today, that are on my mind that I need to make sure that the government is dealing with, anticipating moving forward. So that's probably the biggest surprise.
Political interviews where leaders dodge questions, defend mistakes, and try to survive the moment. And then there are interviews like this one, where a prime minister doesn't sound like he's reacting to events. He sounds like he's shaping the future of his country. In this year-end interview, Mark Carney didn't sound shaken. He didn't sound worried. He didn't sound defensive. He sounded calm, prepared, confident, and absolutely clear about one thing. Canada is not backing down. Canada is not bowing. Canada is not waiting for Washington to be kind. Canada is building itself stronger than before. And the tone is set immediately. Right from the opening, Carney delivers the line that defines everything else in this interview. For years, Canada has often been talked about like the junior partner, the softer voice in North America. But this time, Carney made it crystal clear. Canada will not rush. Canada will not panic. Canada will not sign a deal that hurts its workers, its industries, or its sovereignty, even if the pressure is coming from Donald Trump himself.
President Trump faces midterm elections next fall. The U.S. Supreme Court is set to rule on whether his tariff scheme is legal or not. Is one strategy simply to wait him out, to let events potentially take over?
Well, certainly a strategy is not to rush into a bad deal, and that's what we've been very disciplined about. And every week that goes by, the more that we're developing our economic strategy at home, the more we're developing those relationships abroad, the stronger we get. So you gave the example, you prompted me on the defense spending, that $80 billion. That's an enormous amount of money. That's necessary to protect our Arctic. It's necessary to make sure the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces have the right equipment.
Carney doesn't shout it. He doesn't threaten anyone. He doesn't perform. He simply states that every week Canada waits. Canada actually becomes stronger, more resilient, more prepared, more capable of standing on its own. That is not a country that sounds afraid. That is a country that sounds confident. Trump is banking on pressure. Carney is banking on patience, and patience is power. Then comes one of the most defining points of this entire interview. For decades, Canada relied heavily on American defense strength, buying hardware, depending on U.S.-centric systems, and assuming the United States would always be there in the same way. Carney makes it clear that era is ending. Canada is now investing in Canada. Canadian industry, Canadian capability, Canadian defense power, not symbolic, not cosmetic, real strength. 2. This isn't just about tanks and aircraft. It's about sovereignty. It's about economic security. It's about finally saying Canada is not simply protected because of proximity to the U.S. Canada will be protected because Canada built the strength to protect itself. That is nation building. That is independence. That is leadership. Then we get to one of the biggest political shocks of the interview. Carney reveals that conservative MPs, people who built their careers opposing liberals, are not being dragged over. They're not being tricked. They're not being begged. They came willingly. Doesn't happen by accident. That happens when seriousness meets credibility. That happens when even political opponents admit in private first, publicly, that at a time like this, Canada needs someone steady, disciplined, and in control. Position members do not defect unless they believe one thing. Canada is safer under this leadership. This is not theatrics. This is political gravity. Carney is sitting right at the center of it. There was a moment in this interview that genuinely shifts the way the world sees Canada. And honestly, it might be one of the most quietly powerful things Mark Carney has said so far as Prime Minister. For decades, global investors, companies, and governments looked to the United States first. The thinking was always the same. America leads, everyone else follows. Today, that assumption is breaking. Carney revealed something extraordinary. Canada isn't chasing foreign partners anymore. Canada isn't begging for investment. Canada isn't hoping to be noticed. Right now, the world is coming to Canada because Canada is stable. Canada is predictable. Canada is secure. Canada is led by a government with a plan. And while Trump's America is drowning in chaos, tariffs, uncertainty, and political turbulence, Canada is offering something far more valuable: trust, consistency, reliability. And that has turned into something even bigger. Demand from Europe, Asia, from the Gulf, from global corporations and governments across the planet. They're choosing Canada. Carney isn't bragging in this moment. He's explaining a reality. Trump's America is loud, but Canada is attractive. Trump's America is chaotic, but Canada is dependable. Trump's America is threatening allies, but Canada is gaining them. That flips the power dynamic entirely, because when the world starts lining up to work with you, you don't negotiate from weakness. You negotiate from strength. That strength is exactly what Carney wanted the world and Trump to hear in this interview. Finally, the interview reaches its most confrontational moment, a blunt accusation, a pointed challenge. The journalist doesn't sugarcoat it. He essentially calls Carney a hypocrite. This is usually where politicians get rattled. They get flustered, they go emotional. Carney does none of that. Stays composed, he stays factual, he stays firm. He doesn't deny reality. The world still uses oil. He doesn't pretend transitions are magical. They take time. Instead, he explains a strategy: protect the environment while also protecting Canadians, toward cleaner energy, while also dealing with the world as it actually exists today. That isn't showmanship. That's leadership. You may agree with his policy. You may disagree with his policy. But what you cannot deny is this: he knows what he is doing, and he is not afraid to defend it now. What we saw in this interview wasn't a leader on the back foot. It wasn't a government scrambling. It wasn't a prime minister justifying survival. It was a prime minister outlining the future. A future where Canada doesn't bow to Trump, doesn't live in fear of Washington, doesn't depend on anyone else to define its strength. A Canada that is building real capability. A Canada that attracts allies instead of begging for them. A Canada that speaks calmly, acts confidently, deliberately. This wasn't insecurity speaking. This was certainty. And if today proved anything, it's that Canada no longer sounds like the quiet, worried junior partner in North America. Canada sounds like a country that finally understands its power and is ready to use it. Stay tuned for more. And don't forget to subscribe to Canada